Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today we are discussing Cato No. 3 in our continuing series on the Anti-Federalist Papers. Cato No. 3, probably written by Governor of New York George Clinton, is interesting because it's a really general overview of the main core of anti-federalist thought, that being that the government would just be simply too big to handle republicanism as they defined it at the time. Now, we should note that this paper, though it's kind of a general overview, is very important, first of all, because it was one of the earliest to give that overview, and second of all, because both Alexander Hamilton and James Madison respond to it directly in the Federalist Papers. In fact, during this Cato No. 3, the author quotes both John Locke and Montesquieu, who were political philosophers that were well known at the time. Hamilton himself would respond to this paper by saying, "You're leaving out parts of Montesquieu, buddy." And Madison would go on to respond with Federalist No. 10, arguably his most famous Federalist paper and one of the main cores of American political thought. That being said, what does Cato discuss? So Cato discusses essentially that the United States under the Constitution would be just too big a territory with too many people for a republic to work. First of all, the government would be very much removed from the people. The people would be distant from the seat of power. Additionally, because so many people all over the then young United States were they'd have different desires and passions and opinions, and therefore there's no way a federal government could give everyone what it wants, and in fact people would end up being in a fashion oppressed simply because there were too many people under this government. He goes on to say that many of the state governments look like they're getting too big for republicanism anyway. You have Hamilton and many of the Federalists saying, look at Shays' rebellion. We need a federal government that can suppress a rebellion of that nature. And Cato, very specifically in this, discusses that rebellion in Massachusetts and says, no, the problem is Massachusetts government is already too big and it can't even cater to the needs of the people it has. Additionally, look at Maine. They're going to break off pretty soon. So further proving the point that republic will only work in a very small place. He, of course, elaborates for various reasons on why that is. He then goes on to say, because there will be so many people unhappy with how the government's running, because there's no way one government that's that big can cater to everyone's needs, people will not voluntarily comply with the laws, and in fact, the government will need to use force to demand compliance. And once a government starts using force to demand compliance, especially in various places around the country, that will inevitably lead to tyranny. Now, interestingly, that's the general overview. And again, if you've heard that before, it's because you've watched these videos and we've discussed much of this in the past. These are, as I said, very common anti-federalist complaints. But again, Cato was one of the first. He then goes on to do something uncommon. He kind of criticizes the South. I'll remind you, these are being written in New York for a New York audience, but he looks at the South and he basically says, hey, there's a lot of people in South Carolina and Virginia and North Carolina. They're going to be pretty powerful in this new government. And he says, look, he talks about them being able to grow food easily down there, but then he goes on to discuss, quote, their passion for aristocratic distinction where slavery is encouraged. So he's both saying they like to be aristocrats down there, those wealthy George W's, those Tommy Jeffs, and where slavery is encouraged. I'll remind you, by this point, by the late 1780s, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania have already abolished slavery. New York's Manumission Society is already on its way to doing so. They are very much, the North is already in pursuit of freedom, if not equality. The South is very much not in that motion. Granted, this is before the Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, though we're not going to get off on that tangent right now. He also notes that, he says, look at these people in the South. Do you think they're going to care about you in the North? And he actually says about the North, quote, will these men therefore be as tenacious of the liberty and interest of the more northern states, where freedom, independence, industry, equality, and frugality are natural to the climate? Are they really going to protect all those things for you? Now, again, this is a long paper, and we're summing it up briefly here, but I do want to note and reiterate that the argument in Federalist number 10, really one of the most famous Federalist papers, other than 51, is James Madison saying, no, we need a bigger government to protect people from oppression, from tyranny of the majority. And that is pretty much a direct response to Cato. As I said, I believe it's number 7 that Hamilton, maybe number 8, where Hamilton is writing, literally telling Cato he's not quoting Montesquieu correctly. Granted, he ends up saying, doesn't matter, Montesquieu's wrong anyway. That's not the point here. So this was a general overview, as I said, of Cato number 3. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little something. If you're interested in learning more specifics of anti-federalist thought, well, join us next week. We do these every Friday. Hit subscribe, and while you're at it, hit like. It helps more people learn about the channel and therefore learn about the American Revolution. Thank you so much, and I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.